We might be on
But
introduction part 37. We don't know.
yeah,
We'll see how it goes.
no, we can't do that. Bisexual lighting.
You're listening and you have thoughts and you want to share them with us. And we love that.
Oh, sure, put me on the spot, why don't you?
Susie sells seashells by the seashore.
No, she doesn't.
Because it's going to be great. I think you're going to enjoy the heck out of it. Welcome, everybody, to Write Out Loud, the podcast where we talk about story and all things story and writing and characterization. And now, of course, representation. That's the biggest thing we're focusing on. I, of course, Matt Cassim. And I'm here, as always, with the lovely
Christina.
She's here with us as well. Very good. Very good. So we left off last time. We were talking about representation, and we were talking about Heartstopper, of course, because that's our main focus. For those of you who maybe haven't listened before and are just jumping in with both feet, because that's what you do. You don't start at the beginning. You're just those kinds of people. That's okay. We love you. So we're talking about representation, and this is a multi-parter. We think we really could go on for a while, but this one in particular, you had some thoughts about particularly kind of how things kicked off with Heartstopper.
Yeah, they do representation in such a different way than anything else we've seen on TV, even in the books themselves. It seems this way. It's very natural, authentic. It's very subtle. It's really not anywhere over the top. It's all, again, I come back to natural, like everything is just this way. This is the way the world is. So in terms of like paranormal world building, so in Alice's Heartstopper world, these things just exist. And the world within has to deal with it. I think you used the words matter of fact. Everything is just a matter of fact. So I ended up rewatching the first part because I couldn't really recall exactly how they dealt with Elle's, being transgender. And I remember thinking to myself the first time around, they never actually say the word transgender. Oh, she's transgender. It's show instead of tell, which we'll get into later.
Sure.
But the boys sit down and talk about missing her, and the teacher was such a transphobe because he refused to call her by Elle. They never actually talk about who she was before, and I found that to be really, really telling and on purpose. Like this was all very well thought out in dealing with transgender. And as I indicated on the last episode, I know and love somebody who is transgender. And, dealing with it in this way, the representation for them is so ideal because while you can acknowledge that there's a before and after, but once there's an after, like I can go back and think about who they were in the beginning, and it's not the same person.
Sure.
They have now fully formed into the person that they really are. And so the idea that, yes, Elle as transgender, there was a before, but it's really about who she is and not who she was. And so I love the idea that we don't know who she was before, how she was before. It's not something that they dwell on, they talk about. It is moving forward. It is about moving forward. She starts the story at the girls' school. She is a fully formed girl.
Yeah.
Now it'll be interesting to see with season 2 how Alice either addresses or doesn't address, or, how she does the love story between Elle and Tao. But for sure, this lines up with that natural, authentic, subtle, matter of fact.
Yeah.
This is the way it is.
I think it's interesting too, because I think there is a little bit of a commentary within that, right? Which is we don't have to react to it. We don't have to, frankly, have an opinion on it or a discussion about it, right? It is someone else's life experience. It's someone else's identity. It's someone else's person. And just letting them be that person should really be all that ever happens, right? So I
Right.
think there's a little bit of that acknowledgement or a nod to that in there, that it's not for the other characters to have an opinion on it or to be shocked or confused or happy or sad or anything, like any kind of emotion about it. It's just
Yeah.
that's that's their person. They know this person, they know Elle, and they have simply transferred to another school, right? It's just this person is no
Yep.
longer at this school. So how does that impact them? Absolutely. That is something they absolutely get into a conversation about, right? To your point. So I think it's interesting to have that commentary and to think about it from that lens, because I think it is more powerful than perhaps we even give it credit for.
Yeah. And I think what you just said there is another key word: acceptance. So, what do all of these characters have in common? Their acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
not just of who others are in their group, but also who they eventually allow into their group, i.e., Nick. I think even Nick, to a point, is all about acceptance of self.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we get into that episode where he's, something's going on, I have these feelings, let me type it into the computer. Am I gay? And uh, it doesn't become the factor in the show,
Mm-hmm.
because he quickly learns to accept that, oh, okay, I I really like Charlie. Then, I'm just going to explore this, and then eventually figures out that, wait a minute, I don't just like Charlie, I like girls too. There's this thing called bisexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think acceptance is another big key word for the representation in this show. Certainly it has, a character who isn't accepting, and that's, Ben.
Yep.
Um, and you could make an argument for Harry too, but it's more Ben who isn't accepting himself. The idea that Ben could also, he's caught with the girl, but he also likes Charlie. So is he bi or is he gay? But
Yep.
he's not willing to explore any sort of self acceptance. So, that's not something that, at least so far, we're going to explore with Alice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting to me too. I bumped a little bit when you said acceptance at first, and I was thinking about that word, because
Yeah.
in a way, like, that word can have a negative connotation, even when you think about, like, I think the way that you said it was absolutely spot on, and I don't think you said anything wrong. I just, in my head, had this moment of like acceptance, like it just has this weird feeling like somebody has to accept someone else, right? It was kind of back to what I was talking about with them just sort of
Mm-hmm.
going with the flow, that Elle is who Elle
Mm-hmm.
is, and there's nothing about it, and it's just they just don't go to school anymore. And damn it, that's very frustrating, right? Because we love Elle and we wanted to be with
Yeah.
and hang out with Elle. And then the more as you were talking through it, and the more I was thinking through it, I was like, no, it really is about acceptance, and that's okay if there's some friction with that word sometimes, because it's accurate. Like, it's an accurate word that at some level they had to get to a point where
Yeah.
they accepted it in their own minds. They accepted it for themselves. They accepted it for their friends, their family. It is an accurate portrayal of that. So it's just interesting
Yeah.
that I had that reaction as you were talking through that.
Well, and let's explore that a little bit, because I'm now thinking, okay, if he's thinking this way, we often project our own feelings
Mm-hmm.
into the characters. And I, growing up, we grew up in the same era.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were just a couple of years apart, as far as grade levels, in school, although you went to a different school than I did, we were in the same area. So I
School of
have
Hard Knocks. No, I'm just kidding.
no school of non-representation. There
Sure.
was no representation at all, and acceptance definitely meant something different back then. And so again, circling back around to representation, and I think that's why Alice does it so well, is because acceptance as a positive
Mhm.
experience versus our experience, which was acceptance was not um an easygoing word,
Sure.
because in order to be accepted, you had to first come out.
Hmm.
You had to allow someone to see you and be judged um
Yeah.
in that way. And so so I think generationally, the word acceptance is going to mean something different. And I think it can be triggering to those that were not allowed it,
Hmm.
in such an easy way. And again, using those words that we were using before: matter of fact, subtle,
Hmm.
authentic, natural, you know. Um, I can remember back to high school. I know I've said this before on the podcast that I grew up next to somebody next door, knew him from, 1 or 2 years old, just a few years behind me, and grew up with him all the way, until we were both in our 20s.
Hmm.
I also had a friend in high school who hung out with all the girls. I mean, these things that I see in both of them now looking back, it was so obvious.
Sure.
But back then you didn't, it wasn't even it wasn't a thing, and it should have been a thing. It should have been like, I really would like to know you as a person. So in other words, when you and I met, of course, I was living with those same glasses, so I thought you had a crush on me. But it turned out to be the other guy. But that's just it, is that something that I've always said to my mother, and your mother, I think I've said it to her actually too, when I've seen her, because it's always, our mothers always wanted to get us together.
Yes, they
Always
did.
wanted to get us together.
Yes, they did.
And the thing that I tell them both is, if you change that one thing about Matt, you change the person.
Mhm.
Would you be the same person that you are without everything that you are? And an argument can be made that, maybe perhaps, but I don't want to find out, because I don't want to
Yeah.
change a thing about you,
Yeah.
and that's the acceptance that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's the acceptance in this show, is that I want to know you and everything that you are, and love you for all that you are, and not for what you could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Alice has something I would call, I mean, a concept in this book. I think I would just call it like fluid acceptance. Like it just like kind of
Okay.
a river flows, it just flows and it goes around, little bumps and things happen and whatever, but it just goes, right? It's fluid
Yep.
acceptance because people in the story accept those around them. There is some, again, there's those little pebbles here and there, but there's nothing, major that really causes that problem, right?
Right.
Whereas for some of us, acceptance was more of a arrival destination,
Yeah.
right? And you had to really work to get there. You had to like, kind of come to terms with yourself. And you had to be able to have those conversations and willingly step forward, to your point, and be judged or potentially be judged, right? And there were certainly
Right.
times where, like in my coming out journey, where I would step forward because I didn't care what happened, in that way. And it took a while to get to that point, obviously. But for me, in those moments with those individuals, it didn't matter, because I was like, well, they're either going to love me or I don't need to have them in my life. So it's fine. I don't care either way. Like, they just need to know this about me. And then there were others that I was a lot more, hesitant about, like my mom and dad, for example, so not that
Yeah.
they would have ever and they never had a negative reaction, but it's just, for anybody who's been in that position, it's a terrifying predicament, right? That you find yourself in, that
Well, yeah.
you're standing there. So I remember, and I'll tell this story very quickly, but I remember sitting at the dining room table with my mom. We're watching TV, and I'm like drumming my fingers on the table the whole time, and I'm like sighing every 5 minutes, just heavy, heavy sighs, just drumming the table and just heavy sighs. And finally, my mom turns to me and she's like, "You can leave if you're bored. Like, what is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not bored. I have to tell you something." And she's like, "All right, what is it?" And she flipped the TV off and she turns around, and I was like, and this is also telling too, because at that point I couldn't say the words "I'm gay." So the words that left my mouth were, "I don't date women."
I am not laughing.
It's okay. I'm laughing.
No, I'm not laughing because it's such a ridiculous thing to say. It is such a Matt thing to say. I mean, it's just, if I didn't know you, I wouldn't be laughing. Let me put it that way.
But yeah, I mean, that was my thing. And I think the thing that still to this day I remember about that conversation was her response, which was like, I kind of figured. And I was livid. Let me tell you, I was livid, because I thought for sure, unless I told you, you did not know. And I was like so proud of that I was like, no, I have this mask on. Until I lift it up, you don't get you don't get to know.
You don't get to know me until I say you get
and
to
the
know
fact
me,
that she was like,
then,
"Oh yeah, no, I kind of figured," because I'd always ask you if you're dating anyone, and you were always like, "No."
Yeah, because of course, again, I'll bring up, at that time there was no such thing as asexual. Asexual actually meant, you didn't like sex, you didn't want sex, you didn't, and that's not the whole story.
Yeah.
So of course that would never cross her mind.
Yeah.
But being, gay would. Yeah, do you know, you've never told me that story, your coming out story to your mom.
Yeah, it's just funny. But yeah, I was so mad.
But I don't know if you realize this, but it's strikingly similar to Nick and his mom.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting at the table, and he's, trying to be all subtle about it, and
trying to work up the courage to say it.
Yes. Yeah. So it's very similar that way.
But I think my point in that is not so much about my story, but really about the fact that, again, it's that fluid acceptance. It just is, and everybody goes with it, versus that we're getting there. We've arrived at this point, and whether that's self or others, like, we've got to a point where we now accept this is the reality of the situation. And I think it's just different.
Yeah. Do you think it's generational?
I think to a degree. Absolutely. I think there's still aspects of it. Like, I think, you ask, for the most part, and again, I don't know, I haven't talked to any people younger than 30 in decades, I swear. But I think you ask anybody who's in that position today of coming out, it's still very much the same kind of level of terror, right? Of like, oh, this could go horrifically wrong. And I was very, very lucky with mine. So I don't ever look at that and take that for granted. But I know that it's, it was still terrifying for me, even though I didn't really think it was going to go poorly.
Yeah.
But for those that have, uber religious parents, or who have, parents who have made derogatory comments along the way, and things like that, like, I think, it's very, 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 very terrifying. So I don't think that's changed at all, but I think it's easier to some degree for people to accept.
Yeah.
Themselves.
And I think, again, Nick's coming out to his mom shows exactly what you're talking about, that on one hand, terror, on the other hand, the way she reacts, of course, is just, nothing's changed.
Yep.
Nothing's changed. Although she does say subtly, I wish I had known, I wish I had, because I think that's one thing that Alice again does well, is this subtle, Nick's mom, oh, do you like this girl? Oh, okay. It's not about the girl. Oh, okay. She's not completely oblivious. And I think in the books, it is a little bit more, you can read into it more than you could the TV show. So the TV show maybe put it, I don't want to, over the top is too strong a word, but it was a little more less subtle than it
Sure.
was in the books about her, and of course the character of Imogen did not exist in the books. So there was no, oh, do you want to go on a date with this girl? Scene to have. So, but still, yeah, I do think, and this can be said for writing as well as life.
Mm-hmm.
There always has to be a leader that is going to take the risks, do something different, be the first. I do believe that generation after generation after generation has paved the way.
Mm-hmm.
Are we to the end destination? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
There is too much transphobe, and the whole thing with drag queens. We're not even going to get into because I don't really understand it, because drag queens have existed throughout time, but all of a sudden we're throwing mud at them, and outlawing them.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Don't get me started.
That's not what this podcast is for.
It's a whole other podcast, and we'll do that later.
Again, the reason I say this is the same in writing is when you have someone who is doing something totally different that's never been done before. Writing is one of those, old, traditional. It takes a lot to move the boulders. I was here in publishing prior to ebooks becoming invented and after ebooks, and you would think that like anarchy had happened. And in fact, I was working for a small press publisher that actually did ebook first and then went print. And New York was just trying to wrap its head around ebooks. And so we got a call from John Grisham's then agent. We were going to be in New York, and he said, I want to take you out to lunch and, pick your brains about this ebook thing. And I'm thinking, pick our brains about ebooks. Ebooks are just like other editions, paperback, hardcover. Even way back, we're talking early times when paperback came, they were like, oh my God, no one's going to buy hardcover anymore. Yeah. And he was the same way. So his whole purpose was, how do I negotiate ebooks? Well, you negotiate ebooks just like you do the paperback version, the hardcover version, the audiobook version, all of the different versions. It's just a different format.
Yep.
So again, when you're talking about representation, I view it the same as those publishing aspects of someone's got to be the leader. Someone's got to step out. So in publishing, someone stepped out and self-published, first with those ebooks and Amazon and, who at the beginning, I think it was Sony was actually the leader in ebooks before Amazon did Kindle.
Mm-hmm.
And Kobo. And so, you've got to have somebody who's willing to take those risks. And that's why I said in the introduction to Heartstopper, one of the reasons why I wanted to focus this writing podcast on Heartstopper and Alice herself is because I see her as one of those leaders. She is changing the tide of how representation is going to work in the future.
Sure.
This show, while in part is, has that interwoven coming out story, but that's not the whole story. The whole story is Nick and Charlie. Mm-hmm. It doesn't center around coming out. It doesn't center around their struggles. Their struggles as LGBTQIA. It centers around struggles in, does this person like me?
Yeah. Yeah.
In season 2, it's going to center around different struggles yet. So that's why I said it would be interesting to see where Elle and Tao go, because is Alice going to follow what she's been doing in this subtle, matter of fact, authentic, natural, fluid, as you said, way of writing them? Or is it going to be a little bit about the transgender? It'll be very, very interesting. And the way she does it, I have full confidence she's going to do it really well. So whether she takes either one, but my point is, someone has to have the courage to step out and do those things differently.
Yeah. And be that first person. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And she does a masterful job at it. So I am also excited to see where that goes and how that turns out, because I think it's going to be fantastic. I really do. I love it. Love it.
Anything else from the natural fluidity of the characters that you noticed with the representation?
I think for me, part of it is also kind of a really beautiful way that Alice weaves this sort of tapestry of these characters. So it is about Nick and Charlie, and that's kind of the main thread, right, that runs through this tapestry. But there's so many interwoven fibers that come together, and are very subtle. So like if you can imagine the color palette that would be associated, right, would be very complementary, and it would just all kind of flow together. But I think that's what I like about what she does as well, is she brings all of these things together, and they very much complement each other, and they very much highlight other aspects of one another. You and I talked before about kind of my initial reaction to Tao, that Tao was just very there and like, okay, cool. Like bestie kind of friend of Charlie's, and, hating a little bit on Nick because he's getting a little jealous that spend too
and
much
as
time
Tao
with him.
says, as your token straight friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of turns itself, it turns a whole genre kind of on its head a little bit, right? Like you think about shows like we've talked about in the past, Will and Grace, where Jack very much was kind of that flamboyant, stereotypical character, and was there. And the same could be said, like if someone's looking at Will and Grace as a storyline through that same set of glasses, they might be like, oh, that's a very much like, okay, this guy's just here and he shows up and he's funny and okay, great, but like, so what, right? Like, so it's interesting to kind of see how that flips within what Alice has done with Heartstopper.
So let me ask you this. You just said flips it on its head. So like there's one token straight person, and the rest are all LGBTQIA. Now we're going to get into the A in the second season. So we'll see where she takes that. But some critics have actually said, let's get everybody in there represented. And, like that's not realistic. Do you think that's realistic in today's terms? Again, I don't know myself, because like you said, I'm not necessarily, talking to teens, 20s, LGBTQIA. But I think that people find each other.
Yes.
And of course, they gravitate towards people that are like them.
Even if slightly different variations of that. Yeah, I think it is. No, I think, on one hand, I think the story is not written for everybody, right? I think it's definitely speaking to a target audience, and that target audience is people who either are LGBTQ, are allies of LGBTQ, have people in their family and friends circles that are, like it all does sort of revolve around that community. And that community is very much this sort of conglomeration of different aspects, right? Different individuals. So I think it's absolutely accurate. I think anytime that you think about a group of friends, they're all going to be a little bit different in some way, but they're all going to have very much that kind of similar strain that sort of runs through them, right? Yeah. And I think for the most part, people who are critical of the show because they don't really get that, or they don't see that viewpoint, is because they're not the target audience. Like, I'm sure Alice would say it. I don't want to presume what she says, but I would think, right, in my heart of hearts, that she's like, I want everybody to enjoy it and love it. And I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. But I do think there is a target audience for any given story. And this one happens to be, anybody who's kind of had that experience in one way, shape, or form, or has a connection to that community in one way, shape, or form. I don't know. That's yeah. So I mean, I think it is very much true to life.
Yeah. I think that the way the world is now, I can see this happening. So I'm going to use Nick as the example. When I was saying like finds like, I'm not actually talking about the LGBTQ. I'm actually talking about Nick discovering that his friends are not necessarily kind, that
Sure.
his friends are judgmental, that they don't line up with who he is as a person. Like, when he hears what those friends say, like at the birthday party, at Harry's birthday party, where he says, why are you hanging out with Charlie? And at that point, he does like Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the crush already. And he just can't believe that this is coming out of his mouth. Like, really? This is what you're going to say? Because at that point, he hasn't quite accepted that he's, eventually what he discovers is that he's bi, but he also is looking at it from the perspective of a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am not the type of person that wants to remain friends with somebody that is like that. Now, it takes him a few episodes to actually like cut ties. Maybe not until the fight, episode 7, but that's really kind of my basis of this is why those friends find each other, is that they all are, again, I'm going to use that word acceptance, because they accept each other for who they are. Tao accepts that the group is based in LGBTQ. He is an ally. But at that point, Isaac, in the script, in the show, Isaac is not out. Isaac has not said what he is. We actually don't know what he'll be. Some people are assuming he'll be like the character that he, fills in for, Alad.
Sure.
But we don't know for sure, who he's going to be. Now, Alice has given a lot of like, big asexual plans for season 2. We'll see what happens there. But I think at this point, without Isaac being out, he is absolutely 100% accepted for being the nose in the book guy. He's invited to every single thing. He doesn't always come to every single thing, but he is invited to every single thing. And it's okay. He is accepted that he's going to be sitting there reading a book sometimes, when they go to the rugby matches, there he is with his book, so, I think the key here is the acceptance.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we should end this episode on, is the umbrella of acceptance of how natural and fluid the representation is. It's matter of fact. The acceptance of differences in characters, the idea that you align with people that are more like you, and not just LGBTQIA, but ethically, morally kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Well, that's where we wrap it up then. So again, tell us, where do we find you online? We want more, Christina. Tell us where to find you.
You can always find me on bookmatchmaker.com, Christina at bookmatchmaker.com. I am most active on Instagram. You can find me there at Bookmatchmaker, but I'm on all social media as Bookmatchmaker, so you can find me pretty much anywhere.
Perfect.
And you? Where can we find you, Mr. Matt?
And I'm a man of mystery. No, you can find me on Kassem, CASSM.omg.lol. Fantastic service, by the way. Not a sponsor, just saying. And you can find out all my stuff there. It's very easy. Find all the socials, everything you ever needed. Kassem.omg.lol.
Good.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.